What's your rank, sweetheart? Dishwasher first class.
Staff Sergeant Colt Ramsey's voice boomed across the Joint Operations briefing room at Coronado Naval Base, his perfectly pressed navy dress blues catching the harsh fluorescent lighting as he gestured dismissively at the lone female figure standing at attention. Commander Evelyn Cross stood rigid in her Army combat uniform, the woodland camouflage pattern crisp despite the early 7 a.m. hour. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation military bun, not a strand out of place, while her blue eyes remained fixed straight ahead in perfect military bearing. Among the 30 male SEALs seated in precise rows at the white briefing tables, she was the only soldier, not sailor, present. Ramsey circled her like a predator showcasing his catch, his polished dress shoes clicking against the concrete floors with theatrical precision. I mean, what's the Army doing in a Navy briefing? Did you get lost on your way to the mess hall? The room erupted in laughter, phones already recording what promised to be the morning's entertainment between service branches. But what none of them noticed was how Eve's hands remained perfectly still at her sides despite the humiliation, how her breathing stayed controlled and measured, how her eyes had already cataloged every exit and potential threat in the room. The small name tape on her chest read, Cross, but what they couldn't see were the ribbons and decorations hidden beneath her field jacket. In exactly 18 minutes, when that ACU top would be torn away during a routine inspection, every person in that briefing room would understand they had just witnessed the biggest mistake of Colt Ramsey's decorated naval career. But for now, he was in his element, completely unaware that he was mocking a ghost who didn't officially exist. The morning briefing had been called to address Joint Operations Security Protocols, a routine administrative meeting that should have lasted 45 minutes maximum. But Lieutenant Braxton Crane, seated in the second row, had spotted the Army uniform the moment Eve walked through the steel double doors. His voice carried that particular brand of inter-service rivalry that turned professional meetings into playground disputes. Seriously, what is the Army doing in a classified Navy briefing? Send her back to Fort Benning where she belongs. Crane's comment drew nods and chuckles from the assembled SEALs, their confidence bolstered by the pack mentality that transformed individual sailors into a mob. Chief Diego Morales, a 20-year veteran with 3 Purple Hearts and enough combat decorations to open a museum, raised his hand with mock seriousness. I question whether she even has the proper security clearance for this facility. Should we be discussing classified operations in front of external personnel? The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Eve's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her position of attention. Her weight shifted slightly, left foot forward, right foot angled 15 degrees back. The subtle stance adjustment of someone who'd spent countless hours in formation, but had also learned to fight from that position. Dr. Silas Ivers watched from his corner position near the projection screen, his civilian clothes marking him as the intelligence liaison everyone tolerated but nobody trusted. His eyes fixed on Eve's bearing. The way she held herself wasn't just military discipline, it was something deeper. Recognition flickered in his expression, the look of someone remembering a classified briefing from years past. Navy protocols require positive identification for all personnel, Eve said quietly, her voice carrying just enough volume to reach Ramsey without appearing to challenge him directly. Section 4, 7-3 of the Joint Operations Manual specifies cross-service verification procedures. The room fell silent for exactly 3 heartbeats. Every SEAL in the briefing room knew Navy protocols backward and forward, but the specific regulation she'd cited was typically known only to officers with joint operations experience. More importantly, it was the correct regulation, quoted verbatim. Ramsey's eyes narrowed. He'd expected stammering, apologies, maybe tears. Instead, he'd gotten precise military doctrine from someone who supposedly didn't belong in his briefing room. Oh, so the Army thinks they know Navy regulations better than the Navy? That's rich. But beneath the bravado, something had shifted. The easy target had just demonstrated knowledge that didn't match her apparent rank or assignment. Several of the more experienced SEALs exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that happened between professionals who'd learned to read situations quickly. If you're feeling that instant surge of anger watching Eve get disrespected like this, I totally get it. This story is about to expose layers of deception that run deeper than anyone imagines. But before we dive into this military conspiracy, I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching from today? Are you tuning in from somewhere in the States, maybe overseas, or another corner of the world entirely? Your location actually matters for what's coming next. The security cameras mounted in each corner of the briefing room tracked with mechanical precision, their lenses adjusting focus as the confrontation developed. In the facility's security booth 3 floors below, monitors displayed multiple angles of the same scene. The duty officer, Petty Officer Martinez, leaned forward in his chair as he recognized something the people in the briefing room had missed. Eve's hands, hanging loose at her sides, showed the telltale calluses of someone who had spent thousands of hours on weapons systems. The slight discoloration on her trigger finger, the specific pattern of scarring on her knuckles, these weren't the hands of someone who pushed papers in a garrison assignment. Ramsey continued his performance, feeding off the energy of his audience. I bet she's never even seen combat, probably spent her whole career in logistics, counting MREs and ordering toilet paper. He paused for effect, waiting for the laughter to peak. What's your MOS, sweetheart? Oh, wait, that's military occupational specialty, for those who might not understand actual military terminology. Eve's response was delivered in the same quiet tone, but something had changed in her posture, a subtle straightening that transformed her from defensive to ready. 11 Bravo. The laughter died abruptly. 11 Bravo was infantry, direct combat arms. The silence stretched as 30 elite warriors processed the implications. Infantry soldiers didn't typically attend joint operations briefings unless they had specialized training or experience that made their presence necessary. Chief Morales cleared his throat, his earlier mockery replaced by professional curiosity. 11 Bravo at a Navy classified briefing suggests special operations background. What units have you served with? It was a perfectly reasonable question, the kind of professional inquiry that happened when warriors recognized another warrior. But Eve's hesitation wasn't uncertainty, it was calculation. Her eyes swept the room one more time, cataloging faces, recording details, making decisions that would echo far beyond this morning's briefing. Various assignments, she replied, the non-answer of someone whose service record contained too many redacted pages for casual discussion. Dr. Ivers shifted in his position, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke. The Pentagon Liaison Office cleared her presence for this briefing. Her credentials were verified through appropriate channels. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen classified files that others hadn't. Ramsey spun toward the intelligence officer, his anger finding a new target. With respect, Doctor, this is a Navy facility conducting Navy operations. We don't need Army oversight for missions we've been running successfully for decades. But Lieutenant Crane had noticed something else. The way Eve checked her watch. Not a nervous gesture, but the precise timing check of someone operating on a schedule. The kind of timing that mattered when coordinates had to align with satellite windows, or when extraction teams needed specific markers. What time is the package arriving? Crane asked suddenly, the question surprising everyone, including himself. Eve's eyes found his face, and for just a moment, the careful mask slipped. The look she gave him wasn't confusion or fear, it was evaluation. She was assessing whether he had made an educated guess or whether he'd stumbled onto operational knowledge that compromised her mission. What package? Ramsey demanded, his voice rising as the simple confrontation became something more complicated. The steel double doors at the briefing room's entrance opened with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and Admiral Thomas Thorne stepped inside. His dress-white uniform was immaculate, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulder boards, ribbons covering the left side of his chest in a display of 35 years of naval service. The room snapped to attention with the synchronized precision of a drill team, 30 voices calling "Admiral on deck" in perfect unison. Admiral Thorne's presence filled the briefing room like a weather front, changing the atmospheric pressure and everyone's breathing patterns. His steel-gray eyes swept the assembled personnel with the kind of assessment that had evaluated combat operations from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. When his gaze reached Eve Cross, standing alone at the front of the room, something shifted in his expression. "Good morning, Commander Cross," Admiral Thorne said, his voice carrying across the silent briefing room with casual authority. The impact was immediate and devastating. 30 elite warriors who had spent the last 10 minutes mocking a supposed logistics specialist suddenly found themselves processing the word commander. In the Army, that rank meant someone with significant command authority, extensive training, and clearance levels that most of them would never achieve. Eve came to attention with movements so precise they seemed choreographed, her salute crisp and held, until the Admiral returned it. "Good morning, Admiral. Thank you for accommodating this joint briefing." The exchange was professional, routine, and absolutely crushing to everyone who had been recording videos for their social media accounts. The woman they'd dismissed as Lost Army personnel was not only legitimate military leadership, but she was operating at a level that required direct interaction with flag officers. Ramsey's face had gone through the several color changes, settling on a pale gray that matched the Admiral's eyes. Lieutenant Crane slowly lowered his phone, realizing that his morning entertainment had just become a potential career-ending incident. Chief Morales, to his credit, maintained his military bearing even as he processed the implications of his earlier questions about security clearance. Admiral Thorne moved through the briefing room, with the measured pace of someone accustomed to having every eye in the room track his movements. His route took him past the seated SEALs, past the projection screen where classified operational maps waited to be displayed, and finally to the position directly beside Commander Cross. "Gentlemen," the Admiral began, his voice requiring no amplification to reach every corner of the room. "Commander Cross has been assigned to this facility as part of a joint operations evaluation. Her presence here represents the highest levels of inter-service cooperation, and her mission has direct authorization from the Secretary of Defense." The words settled over the briefing room like a blast wave, each revelation hitting harder than the last. Joint operations evaluation meant she wasn't just visiting, she was assessing their performance. Direct authorization from SecDef meant her mission carried weight that could affect careers, budgets, and the future of joint military cooperation. Dr. Ivers allowed himself a small smile from his corner position, the expression of someone who'd known the truth while watching others stumble toward understanding. His security clearance included access to personnel files that revealed the careful orchestration behind Commander Cross's assignment to Coronado. "Sir," Chief Morales spoke carefully, his voice carrying the weight of someone trying to salvage a situation that had gone far beyond simple embarrassment. "We weren't informed of the evaluation timeline or parameters." Admiral Thorne's response was immediate and sharp. "The evaluation began the moment Commander Cross entered this facility. How personnel interact with unfamiliar authority figures, how assumptions affect professional judgment, how quickly adaptation occurs when new information becomes available. These are all critical components of joint operations effectiveness." The briefing room had become a laboratory, and every person present had just discovered they were test subjects. The morning's entertainment had been documented, recorded, and would undoubtedly become part of an official report that would reach levels of command they could barely imagine. Eve Cross remained at attention, her expression giving nothing away. But those who looked carefully could see the slight tension around her eyes, the controlled breathing of someone managing significant stress. Whatever her actual mission entailed, it clearly extended beyond simple evaluation protocols. Commander Cross's background includes specialized training that makes her uniquely qualified for this assessment, Admiral Thorne continued. Her operational experience spans multiple theaters, multiple command structures, and operational parameters that most personnel will never encounter. It was professional praise delivered in military language, but the underlying message was clear. They'd been mocking someone whose qualifications exceeded their own. The woman they'd dismissed as logistics support had training and experience that warranted direct attention from Admiralty. Ramsey found his voice, though it came out smaller than his usual commanding tone. "Sir, we intended no disrespect to Command Cross or to the evaluation process. Intentions matter less than actions, Staff Sergeant, and actions have consequences that extend beyond this briefing room." The Admiral's words carried the weight of career implications, performance reports, and professional futures hanging in the balance. The specialized communication equipment Commander Cross carried included military-grade encrypted tablets with satellite connectivity capabilities originally developed for special operations in hostile territories. These ruggedized devices featured advanced biometric security systems and reinforced screens capable of withstanding extreme operational conditions that would completely destroy standard civilian electronics. Lieutenant Crane, still processing the revelation that his morning's entertainment had been a professional evaluation, raised his hand with the careful precision of someone walking through a minefield. "Sir, what parameters will be used to assess our performance during the evaluation period?" Admiral Thorne's smile was not reassuring. Commander Cross will determine assessment parameters based on operational requirements and mission objectives that remain classified at your current clearance levels. The answer was both completely appropriate and absolutely terrifying. They were being evaluated by criteria they couldn't access, by someone whose background they'd fundamentally misunderstood, for purposes that extended beyond their knowledge or control. Dr. Burr. Ivers stepped forward from his corner position, his civilian clothes giving him a different perspective on the military dynamics playing out before him. Admiral, will the evaluation include intelligence sharing protocols and interagency cooperation frameworks? All aspects of joint operations will be assessed, Doctor. Commander Cross has extensive experience with intelligence integration, multi-service coordination, and operational security measures that will test every aspect of this facility's capabilities. The scope was expanding with each revelation. What had begun as a simple morning briefing had become a comprehensive examination of everything they did, how they did it, and whether they could adapt when circumstances changed without warning. Eve Cross finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension with military precision. The evaluation parameters are designed to assess real-world readiness for joint operations where cultural assumptions, service rivalries, and failure to adapt can result in mission failure and personnel casualties. Her words carried the weight of personal experience, the authority of someone who'd seen what happened when military professionals let assumptions override assessment. The briefing room fell silent as 30 elite warriors processed the implications of their morning's behavior through the lens of operational reality. Admiral Thorne checked his watch, a gesture that seemed casual but clearly marked time boundaries that mattered for whatever was scheduled to happen next. Commander Cross, are you prepared to begin the operational briefing? Yes, sir. All parameters are in position. The exchange was professional, routine, and utterly mystifying to everyone who didn't have access to the classified operational details that had brought Commander Cross to Coronado Naval Base. Whatever her real mission involved, it was beginning now, and the morning's interpersonal drama had been merely the opening act. The pieces are starting to connect in ways that should terrify everyone in that room. If you're invested in uncovering the truth about Project Helios alongside Eve, stick with me because the next revelation is going to change everything you thought you knew about this base. The operational briefing that followed would have been routine under normal circumstances. Standard presentations on security protocols, updated intelligence assessments, and coordination procedures for upcoming training exercises. But the presence of Commander Cross had transformed every mundane detail into potential evaluation criteria. Admiral Thorne moved to the projection screen as classified maps appeared, showing operational theaters across 3 continents. Gentlemen, your upcoming deployment will involve joint operations with Army Special Forces, Air Force Special Operations, and intelligence assets from multiple agencies. Cultural adaptation and inter-service cooperation will determine mission success or failure. The maps showed terrain that several of the SEALs recognized, mountainous regions where American forces had operated for years, where the difference between ally and enemy often came down to cultural understanding and professional respect. The kind of operations where personality conflicts between service branches had resulted in real casualties. Commander Cross moved to the tactical display, her movements confident and precise. As she reached for the laser pointer, her ACU sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a series of small scars along her forearm. The marks were too regular, too precisely spaced to be accidental injuries. They looked like the kind of tracking marks someone might make to count deployments, missions, or lost personnel. Operational security for joint missions requires trust between service components, she began, her voice carrying easily through the briefing room. When personnel spend time evaluating each other's legitimacy rather than focusing on mission parameters, operational effectiveness degrades rapidly. Her words hit the room like targeted fire. Every SEAL present understood that she was describing exactly what they'd done for the past 20 minutes, spending time questioning her presence instead of focusing on the briefing content. The evaluation had already begun, and they were failing. Chief Morales, recognizing the professional development opportunity, leaned forward in his seat. Ma'am, what specific protocols should be implemented to prevent cultural assumptions from affecting mission readiness? It was a good question, the kind of professional inquiry that demonstrated learning and adaptation. Commander Cross nodded acknowledgement before responding. Standard protocol requires personnel verification through appropriate channels before making operational judgments. Assumptions based on appearance, service branch, or perceived rank create vulnerabilities that hostile forces can exploit, Dr. Ivers added from his position near the intelligence displays. Recent operations in Eastern Europe have shown that adversaries specifically target inter-service friction points to create operational disruption. The comment carried weight because it referenced current classified operations that most of the room had no access to. It also confirmed that Commander Cross's presence was related to active threat assessment rather than routine evaluation procedures. Lieutenant Crane raised his hand again, his earlier mockery replaced by professional curiosity. "Ma'am, are you able to discuss the specific threat indicators that led to this evaluation being ordered?" Commander Cross paused, glancing toward Admiral Thorne before responding. Threat indicators remain classified, but personnel should understand that operational security extends beyond traditional OPSEC measures to include behavioral patterns that signal internal dysfunction to outside observers. The answer was deliberately vague, but carried clear implications. Someone had been watching their facility, analyzing their interactions, and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited. The evaluation wasn't random. It was a response to specific intelligence that suggested vulnerabilities in their joint operations capabilities. Ramsey found his voice, though his earlier bravado had been replaced by careful professionalism. "Ma'am, what specific improvements does the evaluation process recommend for facilities like Coronado?" "Improvements will be determined based on observed performance during realistic stress scenarios, morning briefings, personnel interactions, and response to unexpected situations all provide data for assessment recommendations." Her answer confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. They'd been under evaluation from the moment she walked through the doors. Every laugh, every recorded video, every dismissive comment had been documented and would become part of a formal assessment that would reach levels of command they rarely interacted with. Admiral Thorne moved to the center of the briefing room, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Commander Cross's evaluation will continue throughout her assignment here. Personnel should understand that professional behavior and adaptive thinking will be continuously assessed through both formal and informal interactions." The message was clear. They were being tested constantly, and the tests weren't limited to official briefings or training exercises. Every conversation, every assumption, every interaction with Commander Cross would contribute to an evaluation that could affect their careers and the future of joint operations at Coronado. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with a classified folder in his hands, his movement signaling a transition to more sensitive material. "Admiral, should we proceed with the Project Helios briefing or wait for additional clearance verification?" The words Project Helios dropped into the briefing room like a depth charge. Several of the senior SEALs exchanged glances that suggested familiarity with the classification, while others maintained carefully neutral expressions that revealed nothing. Commander Cross's reaction was subtle but telling. Her breathing changed, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that Project Helios represented something more personal than routine operational intelligence. Her right hand moved unconsciously toward her hip, the motion stopping just short of where a service weapon would rest. Admiral Thorne checked his watch again, the gesture carrying more significance than simple time management. "We'll proceed with the Helios briefing. All personnel present have appropriate clearance levels, and the timeline requires immediate information sharing." The timeline reference suggested coordination with external events, satellite windows, personnel movements, or operational deadlines that required specific timing. Whatever Project Helios involved, it was moving forward according to a schedule that didn't allow for delay or adjustment. Dr. Ivers moved to the classified display terminal, his fingers entering access codes that caused multiple screens to activate throughout the briefing room. The images that appeared showed facility layouts, personnel files, and operational timelines that spanned several years of activity. Project Helios was initiated to identify and develop enhanced operational capabilities within existing military frameworks. Dr. Ivers began, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone discussing classified material. The project focused on personnel with specific psychological and physical profiles that suggested exceptional potential for specialized operations. Commander Cross remained motionless during the briefing, but those watching carefully could see tension building in her shoulders, her jaw, her hands. Whatever Project Helios represented, her personal connection to it went beyond professional interest. The classified displays showed recruitment timelines, training protocols, and operational deployments that painted a picture of long-term military development programs operating outside normal command structures. Personnel were identified, recruited, and trained according to criteria that remained largely classified even within the Helios briefing. Recruitment protocols identified candidates during early military service, often before specialized training or operational deployment, Dr. Ivers continued. Physical capabilities, psychological resilience, and adaptive intelligence were primary selection criteria. Chief Morales leaned forward, his combat experience providing context for the briefing material. Doctor, are you describing a special operations recruitment program or something beyond traditional SOF selection? Project Helios operated parallel to conventional special operations programs, but utilized different assessment criteria and training methodologies. Graduates were integrated back into normal command structures while maintaining enhanced capabilities and mission availability. The explanation was bureaucratic language that disguised something more complex and potentially controversial. Enhanced capabilities suggested training beyond normal military parameters, while integration back into normal commands implied covert placement of specially trained personnel throughout military structures. Lieutenant Crane raised his hand, his earlier humiliation forgotten in the face of classified intelligence that exceeded his normal access level. Sir, how many personnel were processed through Project Helios programs? Dr. Ivers glanced toward Admiral Thorne before responding. Exact numbers remain classified, but the program operated for approximately 8 years and processed candidates from all service branches. 8 years suggested a substantial commitment of resources and personnel. Multiple service branches meant coordination at the highest levels of military command. The scope of Project Helios was clearly much larger than a simple experimental training program. Commander Cross spoke for the first time during the Helios briefing, her voice carrying new tension. Doctor, are you able to discuss the current operational status of Helios graduates? The question seemed routine, but it carried undercurrents that everyone in the briefing room could sense without understanding. Commander Cross wasn't asking for general information. She was seeking specific intelligence about people she knew personally. Current operational status varies by individual assignment and mission requirements. Some graduates remain in conventional units, others have been assigned to specialized programs, and several have been transferred to classified operations outside normal military structures. The answer was deliberately vague, but it confirmed that Project Helios graduates were scattered throughout the military and potentially beyond it. The program had created a network of enhanced personnel whose current activities and loyalties might be unknown even to military leadership. Admiral Thorne moved to the display screen, his finger tracing operational timelines that showed Project Helios activity spanning multiple administrations and military leadership changes. The program was terminated 18 months ago following operational complications that required extensive damage control. Operational complications suggested that something had gone wrong with Project Helios, mission failures, security breaches, or personnel issues that required high-level intervention. Damage control implied cover-ups, reassignments, and possibly criminal investigations that remained classified. Sir, Ramsey asked carefully, are current joint operations affected by these operational complications? Admiral Thorne's pause before answering suggested that the question touched on sensitive areas of ongoing concern. Current operations include protocols designed to identify and mitigate potential security risks associated with Project Helios personnel and methodologies. The statement confirmed what everyone in the briefing room had begun to suspect. Commander Cross's presence at Coronado was directly related to Project Helios. Whether she was investigating the program, hunting its graduates, or representing its interests remained unclear, but her mission clearly involved the classified project that had just been revealed. Dr. Ivers moved to close the classified displays, but not before several personnel had memorized details that would undoubtedly be discussed in private conversations after the briefing ended. The information about Project Helios would spread through the facility's informal networks within hours, regardless of classification restrictions. We're approaching the moment that will shatter every assumption about loyalty and betrayal. The identity reveal coming up isn't just shocking. It's the key that unlocks a conspiracy spanning decades. You won't want to miss this. The briefing room's atmosphere had shifted dramatically during the Project Helios presentation. What had begun as routine inter-service antagonism had evolved into something much more complex and potentially dangerous. Every person present understood that they were now part of a classified operation that extended far beyond their normal duties and clearance levels. Commander Cross moved to the central display screen, her movements carrying new authority that commanded immediate attention. Project Helios personnel were integrated into units worldwide to assess command structures, operational security, and personnel reliability under combat conditions. Her words carried implications that reached every person in the briefing room. If Helios graduates had been placed in units worldwide, then every military organization potentially included personnel whose primary loyalty might be to classified programs rather than conventional command structures. The comprehensive insurance and legal protection systems utilized by elite military personnel required specialized coverage that exceeded standard civilian policies. Advanced liability frameworks designed specifically for high-risk operational environments provided complete financial protection during classified missions where standard coverage would be completely inadequate. "Ma'am," Chief Morales asked, his voice carefully controlled, "are you able to confirm whether any Helios personnel are currently assigned to this facility?" The question hung in the briefing room, like live ordnance. If Commander Cross confirmed Helios personnel at Coronado, then everyone present would need to reconsider their relationships, their conversations, and their trust in colleagues they had served with for years. Commander Cross's response was immediate and chilling. Personnel assignments remain classified, but the evaluation process includes assessment of existing security protocols and personnel reliability measures. The non-answer was an answer. If she couldn't discuss personnel assignments, but was assessing security protocols, then Helios graduates were almost certainly present at Coronado. The evaluation wasn't just testing their ability to work with other services. It was determining whether they could be trusted with classified information that some of their colleagues might be secretly reporting to unknown authorities. Admiral Thorne stepped forward, his presence signaling a transition to even more sensitive material. "Commander Cross, are you prepared to proceed with the operational assessment phase?" "Yes, sir. All parameters are in position for immediate implementation." The exchange suggested that the morning's briefing had been in preparation for something more complex and potentially dangerous. Whatever operational assessment involved, it was about to begin, and everyone present would be participants whether they chose to be or not. Dr. Ure. Ivers moved to his corner position, but his attention was focused on a small device in his hand that resembled a smartphone but clearly served specialized functions. His fingers moved across the screen with the precision of someone initiating protocols that had been planned in advance. Lieutenant Crane noticed the device and raised his hand. "Doctor, are communication protocols being modified for the assessment phase?" "Standard communication protocols remain in effect, but additional monitoring systems have been activated to document interaction patterns and information security compliance." The revelation that they were being actively monitored added another layer of stress to an already complex situation. Every conversation, every decision, every reaction was being recorded and analyzed according to criteria they couldn't access or understand. Ramsey found himself in the uncomfortable position of someone who had spent the morning creating a permanent record of behavior he now deeply regretted. "Sir, will previous interactions be included in assessment parameters, or does evaluation begin from this point forward?" Admiral Thorne's smile was not reassuring. Assessment began the moment Commander Cross entered this facility. All interactions, decisions, and behavioral patterns contribute to the evaluation database. The confirmation that their morning's behavior was part of the official assessment sent ripples of concern through the briefing room. Career implications, performance reports, and professional futures were all potentially affected by their response to a situation they'd fundamentally misunderstood. Commander Cross moved to a different display screen, her actions revealing additional classified information that painted a broader picture of Project Helios operations. Personnel files, training records, and deployment histories showed the extensive scope of a program that had operated within military structures for nearly a decade. Helios graduates were trained to operate independently within existing command structures while maintaining loyalty to program objectives, she explained, her voice carrying new authority that suggested personal familiarity with the training described. Assessment capabilities included psychological evaluation, loyalty testing, and operational security verification. The description of Helios' capabilities was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. Personnel trained to operate independently within military structures could gather intelligence, influence decisions, and report information without their colleagues ever suspecting their true purpose. Chief Morales processed the implications with the tactical awareness of someone who'd spent decades in special operations. "Ma'am, if Helios personnel were trained for assessment operations, how can conventional personnel distinguish between legitimate evaluation and potential security threats?" It was exactly the right question, the kind of professional inquiry that demonstrated understanding of operational complexity and security implications. Commander Cross nodded acknowledgement before responding with information that changed everything. Conventional personnel cannot make that distinction without access to classified verification protocols. Trust relationships within military structures become compromised when personnel suspect colleagues of divided loyalties or hidden agendas. Her answer confirmed the worst-case scenario. If Helios graduates were present at Coronado, then every professional relationship was potentially compromised. Colleagues who had served together for years might be reporting on each other without anyone being aware of the surveillance. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with additional classified material that expanded the scope of concern beyond individual facilities. Project Helios evaluation protocols were implemented at 17 military installations across 4 geographic regions. Coronado represents the final assessment location before program termination procedures are completed. 17 installations meant hundreds of personnel potentially affected by Helios operations. 4 geographic regions suggested global scope that included overseas deployments and allied cooperation frameworks. The program's reach had been much more extensive than anyone had imagined. Admiral Thorne checked his watch again, the gesture now clearly marking countdown towards some kind of operational deadline. "Commander Cross, how much time remains before implementation of termination protocols?" 37 minutes, sir. All systems are prepared for immediate activation upon confirmation of assessment completion. The time reference suggested that Project Helios termination involved more than simple administrative closure. Systems prepared for activation implied technological components that required specific timing and coordination with external events. The briefing room fell silent as 30 elite warriors processed the implications of countdown timing toward unknown operational objectives. Whatever was scheduled to happen in 37 minutes would apparently determine the future of Project Helios and everyone associated with it. Commander Cross moved to her final display screen, revealing information that would transform their understanding of everything that had happened during the morning's briefing. Personnel photographs, service records, and psychological profiles appeared on multiple monitors throughout the room. Project Helios termination requires verification of program security and elimination of potential compromises to classified operations, she announced, her voice carrying deadly seriousness that commanded absolute attention. Assessment protocols include identification of personnel who represent security risks to program objectives. The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. Project Helios termination included elimination protocols for personnel considered security risks. Everyone in the briefing room understood that their morning's behavior might have classified them as exactly the kind of security risk that termination protocols were designed to address. Ivers activated additional monitoring systems, their screens showing real-time tracking of personnel movements throughout Coronado Naval Base. Every person in the facility was being monitored continuously, their locations and activities documented according to parameters that remained classified. "Gentlemen," Admiral Thorne announced, his voice carrying finality that settled over the briefing room like a death sentence. "You have 36 minutes to demonstrate that your professional judgment and operational security compliance meet standards required for Project Helios termination without additional security measures." The ultimatum was delivered in military language, but its meaning was unmistakable. They were being tested under ultimate pressure, and failure would result in consequences that extended far beyond career implications. Project Helios termination included protocols for dealing with security risks that might involve methods they didn't want to contemplate. Commander Cross reached into her ACU pocket, removing a small device that resembled a garage door opener, but clearly served more sophisticated purposes. Her thumb hovered over the activation button while her eyes swept the room one final time. "Assessment phase implementation begins now," she announced. Behavioral analysis, loyalty verification, and security threat assessment will determine individual termination protocol requirements. The device in her hand began to emit a soft beeping sound that served as an audible countdown toward whatever Project Helios termination actually involved. 36 minutes had become 35, and everyone in the briefing room understood that their next decisions would determine whether they survived the morning. The evaluation that had begun with simple inter-service mockery had evolved into a life-or-death assessment that would test everything they believed about loyalty, duty, and survival in a military system that included programs they'd never imagined and protocols they'd never been trained to handle. The soft beeping from Commander Cross's device filled the briefing room with mechanical precision, each tone marking another second toward unknown consequences. 34 minutes remained on whatever countdown had been initiated, and every person present understood that their survival might depend on decisions they'd make in the next half hour. Lieutenant Crane broke the silence with military directness. "Ma'am, what specific actions do assessment protocols require from personnel under evaluation?" Commander Cross's response carried the weight of someone delivering final instructions. Personnel will maintain normal operational behavior, while assessment systems document behavioral patterns, decision-making processes, and loyalty indicators that determine individual risk classifications. The answer was simultaneously specific and completely useless. Normal operational behavior was impossible when everyone knew they were being evaluated for termination protocols. Decision-making processes became paralyzed when any choice might be interpreted as evidence of security risk. Admiral Thorne moved to the central display screen, his actions revealing additional classified material that painted an even more disturbing picture of Project Helios operations. Financial records, operational budgets, and resource allocation charts showed the massive investment in a program that had operated outside normal military oversight. Project Helios represented the largest covert personnel development program in military history, Admiral Thorne announced, his voice carrying pride that seemed inappropriate given the current circumstances. Enhanced capabilities, loyalty optimization, and operational security measures created a cadre of personnel whose effectiveness exceeded conventional military parameters by significant margins. The description of Helios' achievements sounded like marketing material for a program that was simultaneously being terminated through protocols that included elimination of security risks. The contradiction suggested that Project Helios had succeeded too well, creating personnel whose capabilities exceeded their creators' ability to control them. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with additional documentation that expanded the scope of concern beyond individual facilities or personnel. Helios graduates demonstrated performance capabilities that attracted attention from congressional oversight committees, international intelligence services, and internal security organizations concerned about accountability and control mechanisms. Congressional oversight meant political scrutiny that military leadership desperately wanted to avoid. International attention suggested that Allied intelligence services had identified Helios operations as potential threats to cooperative frameworks. Internal security concerns implied that Helios graduates had been classified as risks by their own military organizations. Chief Morales processed the implications with tactical awareness earned through decades of special operations experience. "Sir, if Helios personnel represent security risks to their own military organizations, how can conventional personnel distinguish between legitimate orders and potential security compromises?" It was exactly the kind of question that demonstrated professional understanding of operational complexity and command structure vulnerability. If Helios graduates had been placed throughout military organizations, then every order, every assignment, every operational decision might serve hidden agendas rather than official military objectives. Commander Cross moved to a different monitoring station, her actions revealing real-time tracking data that showed personnel movements throughout Coronado Naval Base. Every person in the facility was being monitored continuously, their locations and activities documented according to parameters that remained classified but clearly served assessment purposes. Conventional personnel cannot make operational security distinctions without access to classification protocols that remain restricted to evaluation authority, she explained, her voice carrying new tension that suggested personal involvement beyond professional duty. Trust relationships become compromised when personnel suspect colleagues of divided loyalties or hidden operational objectives. The confirmation that trust relationships were compromised hit the briefing room like a psychological weapon. Colleagues who'd served together for years suddenly found themselves evaluating every previous conversation, every shared confidence, every professional relationship through the lens of potential surveillance and betrayal. Ramsey found his voice, though his earlier confidence had been replaced by careful professionalism. "Ma'am, are current personnel under suspicion of security violations, or are assessment protocols designed to identify potential future risks?" Commander Cross's pause before answering suggested that the question touched on sensitive areas of ongoing operations. Assessment protocols evaluate both historical behavior patterns and predictive indicators that suggest future security compliance under stress conditions. Historical behavior patterns meant that their morning's interactions were being analyzed for evidence of character flaws, professional judgment failures, and loyalty indicators that might predict future behavior under pressure. Predictive indicators suggested that psychological profiling was being used to determine whether they could be trusted with continued access to classified operations. The device in Commander Cross's hand continued its countdown, the soft beeping now marking 29 minutes remaining toward whatever termination protocols involved. The sound had become hypnotic, creating artificial urgency that affected everyone's breathing and decision-making processes. Admiral Thorne activated additional display screens throughout the briefing room, revealing operational timelines that showed Project Helios activity coordinated with major military operations across multiple theaters. Personnel deployments, mission assignments, and casualty reports painted a picture of enhanced soldiers operating in environments where conventional forces had failed. Helios graduates demonstrated exceptional performance in operational environments that exceeded survival parameters for conventional personnel. Admiral Thorne continued, his voice carrying satisfaction that seemed disconnected from current termination procedures. Enhanced training, loyalty optimization, and operational capabilities created personnel whose effectiveness in combat operations approached theoretical maximums for human performance. The description of Helios achievements as approaching theoretical maximums suggested training and enhancement methods that went far beyond conventional military parameters. Enhanced capabilities implied physical, psychological, or technological augmentation that created personnel who were no longer entirely human in their operational characteristics. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with classified material that revealed the technological components of Project Helios operations. Biometric monitoring systems, psychological conditioning protocols, and pharmaceutical enhancement programs showed the extensive modification of personnel who had volunteered for what they'd believed was specialized training. Enhanced capabilities included accelerated learning protocols, stress resistance conditioning, and loyalty reinforcement measures that created personnel whose operational reliability exceeded conventional parameters, Dr. Ivers explained, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone describing laboratory experiments rather than human subjects. Accelerated learning suggested neurological modification or pharmaceutical enhancement that allowed rapid skill acquisition beyond natural human limits. Stress resistance conditioning implied psychological programming that eliminated normal fear responses and survival instincts. Loyalty reinforcement measures sounded like brainwashing designed to ensure absolute obedience to program objectives. Lieutenant Crane raised his hand, his earlier humiliation forgotten, in the face of classified intelligence that revealed military programs operating beyond constitutional oversight. "Doctor, were Helios enhancement measures voluntary, or were personnel selected for modification without informed consent?" The question touched on legal and ethical issues that could destroy careers and trigger congressional investigations if classified material revealed unauthorized human experimentation. Dr. Ivers glanced toward Admiral Thorne before responding with information that changed the moral landscape of everything they'd learned. Initial recruitment protocols obtained informed consent for specialized training programs. Enhancement measures were implemented during training phases according to parameters that personnel had agreed to, without full disclosure of specific methodologies or expected outcomes. The careful language disguised human experimentation conducted under military authority with consent obtained through deliberate deception. Personnel had volunteered for specialized training and received psychological, physical, and possibly pharmaceutical modification that created enhanced capabilities at unknown cost to their humanity. Commander Cross spoke for the first time during the enhancement briefing, her voice carrying tension that suggested personal familiarity with the procedures being described. Enhancement protocols included irreversible modifications that affected cognitive function, emotional response patterns, and social integration capabilities. Irreversible modifications meant that Helios graduates could never return to normal human baselines. Cognitive function changes suggested permanent alteration of thinking patterns and decision-making processes. Emotional response modification implied the elimination of normal human feelings in favor of operational efficiency. Social integration problems meant that enhanced personnel could no longer function normally in civilian environments. Chief Morales leaned forward, his combat experience providing context for understanding the implications of permanent enhancement. "Ma'am, are you describing personnel who have been permanently modified for military operations at the cost of their ability to function as normal human beings?" Commander Cross's response was immediate and personal. Helios graduates cannot return to civilian life because enhancement measures eliminated psychological and social capabilities required for normal human relationships and economic function. The confirmation that Helios graduates were permanently damaged hit the briefing room like a confession of war crimes. Military personnel who'd volunteered for specialized training had been transformed into enhanced soldiers who could never again function as normal human beings. The program had created effective weapons at the cost of destroying the humanity of its subjects. Admiral Thorne moved to close several classified displays, but not before everyone present had absorbed details about human experimentation, conducted under military authority, with congressional funding and administrative approval. The scope of Project Helios extended far beyond military training into areas that challenged basic assumptions about human rights and military ethics. Enhanced personnel represent significant security risks because their loyalties remain tied to program objectives rather than conventional military command structures, Admiral Thorne explained, his voice carrying new urgency that suggested immediate operational concerns. Termination protocols ensure that program security is maintained through elimination of potential compromise sources. The revelation that enhanced personnel represented security risks to their own military organizations confirmed the worst-case scenario. Helios graduates had been created as super soldiers but retained loyalty to program objectives rather than normal military authority. Termination protocols were designed to eliminate the security risk by eliminating the personnel. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with final classified material that revealed the current operational status of Project Helios termination procedures. Personnel locations, tracking systems, and elimination protocols showed a coordinated operation designed to neutralize enhanced soldiers who had become threats to the organizations that created them. Termination protocols are currently being implemented at all facilities where Helios graduates have been identified, Dr. Ivers announced, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone discussing pest control rather than human elimination. Coronado represents the final assessment location before program closure procedures are completed. Coronado was the last facility to undergo Helios termination, suggesting that enhanced personnel at other installations had already been eliminated or neutralized according to protocols that remained classified. The countdown in Commander Cross's device was marking time toward the final phase of a program that had decided its own subjects were too dangerous to survive. The briefing room fell silent as 30 elite warriors processed the implications of being present at the final termination of a program that included elimination of enhanced human subjects. Whatever was scheduled to happen in 23 minutes would complete the destruction of evidence and personnel associated with Project Helios. Commander Cross moved to her final monitoring station, revealing tracking data that showed real-time location of all personnel throughout Coronado Naval Base. Every person in the facility was being monitored continuously, their movements documented according to parameters that served termination assessment rather than security protection. Assessment completion will trigger automated termination protocols that eliminate security risks through permanent neutralization measures, she announced, her voice carrying deadly finality that left no doubt about the meaning of permanent neutralization. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the fact that they were discussing murder of military personnel, whose only crime had been volunteering for specialized training that had transformed them into enhanced soldiers. Termination protocols included elimination of witnesses, participants, and anyone with knowledge that could compromise program security. Admiral Thorne activated final display screens that revealed the comprehensive scope of Project Helios termination operations. Military installations across 4 continents were simultaneously implementing protocols designed to eliminate all evidence of enhanced soldier programs and the personnel who had been created through human experimentation. Global termination procedures ensure that Project Helios achievements remain classified and that enhanced personnel cannot compromise operational security through unauthorized disclosure or continued independent operation, Admiral Thorne explained, his voice carrying satisfaction inappropriate for describing mass elimination of military personnel. Global procedures meant that hundreds of enhanced soldiers were being eliminated simultaneously according to coordinated protocols that spanned multiple time zones and command structures. The operation represented the largest cover-up in military history, designed to eliminate evidence of human experimentation and the soldiers it had created. The device in Commander Cross's hand now showed 18 minutes remaining on whatever countdown was measuring time toward termination completion. The beeping had become a death march that marked seconds toward the final elimination of Project Helios and everyone associated with it. Professional development programs designed specifically for elite special operations personnel included comprehensive legal training, advanced tactical instruction, and classified protocol management. These exclusive educational frameworks prepared operatives for complex legal and operational challenges where standard training would be insufficient for sophisticated requirements. But something had changed in Commander Cross's demeanor during the final briefing phase. Her breathing had become irregular, her stance shifted from military attention to defensive readiness, and her eyes no longer focused on the assembled personnel with professional assessment. Instead, she was calculating distances, evaluating threats, and preparing for action that extended beyond evaluation protocols. Chief Morales noticed the change first, his combat experience recognizing the behavioral patterns of someone preparing for violence. "Ma'am, are termination protocols scheduled for immediate implementation, or is additional assessment time available?" Commander Cross's response carried new tension that suggested personal stakes beyond professional duty. Termination protocols will be implemented according to schedule unless assessment parameters identify security compromises that require immediate intervention. The answer confirmed that elimination procedures were scheduled but might be accelerated if assessment determined that security had been compromised. Every person in the briefing room understood that their next actions might trigger immediate termination rather than scheduled elimination. Lieutenant Crane processed the implications with tactical awareness earned through years of special operations training. "Ma'am, what specific actions would assessment protocols interpret as security compromises requiring immediate intervention? Any attempt to communicate assessment information to external authorities, any effort to document or record termination procedures, or any resistance to implementation protocols would trigger immediate security measures." The warning was clear and comprehensive. They were trapped in a briefing room with someone who had been authorized to eliminate them if they attempted to expose, document, or resist the termination of a program that included mass murder of military personnel. Speaking about what they'd learned could trigger immediate elimination. Admiral Thorne checked his watch again, the gesture now clearly marking countdown toward operational deadlines that couldn't be delayed or modified. "Commander Cross, are you prepared to implement immediate termination procedures if assessment parameters indicate security compromise?" "Yes, sir. All systems are prepared for immediate activation upon identification of security threat indicators." The exchange confirmed that Commander Cross was authorized to eliminate everyone in the briefing room if she determined that they represented security risks to Project Helios termination. The evaluation had become a death sentence waiting for justification, and any wrong move would provide that justification. Dr. Ivers moved to his monitoring station, revealing real-time communication intercepts that showed external agencies attempting to contact personnel at Coronado Naval Base. Congressional oversight committees, FBI investigators, and international intelligence services were all trying to gather information about Project Helios operations. "External investigation activities have intensified during the past 48 hours, Dr. Ivers announced, his voice carrying urgency that suggested immediate operational pressure. "Termination protocols must be completed before external authorities gain access to personnel or facilities with direct knowledge of Helios operations." External investigations meant that Project Helios termination was being conducted under time pressure from multiple agencies that were closing in on evidence of human experimentation and enhanced soldier programs. The countdown was measuring time before investigators arrived at Coronado, with legal authority to prevent termination procedures. The briefing room had become a race between elimination protocols and external intervention, with 30 elite warriors trapped in the middle of a cover-up operation that would determine whether evidence of military human experimentation would be preserved or destroyed, along with everyone who possessed direct knowledge. Commander Cross began moving toward the briefing room exit, her actions suggesting preparation for implementation of procedures that would complete Project Helios termination. The device in her hand continued its countdown, now showing 14 minutes remaining, toward whatever elimination protocols had been scheduled. But as she reached for the door controls, her movement caused her ACU blouse to shift, pulling tight across her back and revealing the outline of something beneath the fabric. The shape was too regular, too deliberate to be standard equipment or personal items. It looked like a tattoo or marking that had been carefully concealed throughout the morning's briefing. Ramsey noticed the outline and found himself speaking before considering the security implications of his observation. "Ma'am, are you carrying concealed identification that might clarify your actual role in Project Helios operations?" The question hung in the briefing room like live ordnance. If Commander Cross was concealing identification related to Project Helios, then her role in termination procedures might be more complex than simple evaluation and elimination authority. Commander Cross froze at the door controls, her hand hovering over the access panel while her breathing changed to the controlled rhythm of someone managing extreme stress. Personnel identification remains classified according to operational security requirements that exceed current assessment parameters. The non-answer was revealing because it confirmed that she was concealing identification while avoiding direct lies about her actual role in Project Helios operations. Her hesitation suggested internal conflict about implementing termination procedures that might include elimination of personnel who had identified her concealed status. Admiral Thorne stepped forward, his movement carrying new urgency that suggested recognition of developing complications in what should have been routine termination procedures. "Commander Cross, are assessment protocols compromised by unauthorized personnel observation?" Assessment protocols remain intact, but security parameters may require immediate adjustment based on emerging threat indicators. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the fact that something had gone wrong with Project Helios termination procedures. Commander Cross's concealed identification had been noticed, creating security complications that threatened the success of elimination protocols designed to destroy all evidence of enhanced soldier programs. Dr. Ivers moved to his communications station, his fingers entering access codes that activated emergency protocols throughout Coronado Naval Base. Security systems engaged with soft electronic tones that signaled lockdown procedures designed to prevent unauthorized departure or external communication. "Base security lockdown has been implemented," Dr. Ivers announced, his voice carrying clinical detachment inappropriate for describing the imprisonment of military personnel. "No personnel will be permitted to leave the facility until termination protocols have been completed and security assessment has been finalized." The lockdown confirmation meant that everyone at Coronado was now trapped within the facility while Project Helios termination procedures were implemented. External escape was impossible. Communication with outside authorities was prevented, and elimination protocols could be completed without interference or witness testimony. Lieutenant Crane recognized the tactical situation with professional clarity. "Sir, are current personnel considered hostile subjects requiring neutralization, or are we classified as security risks requiring elimination?" Admiral Thorne's response carried finality that settled over the briefing room like a death sentence. "Personnel classification will be determined by behavioral response to termination protocol implementation. Cooperation ensures quick processing, while resistance triggers enhanced security measures." The ultimatum was delivered in military language, but its meaning was unmistakable. They could submit to elimination without resistance and die quickly, or they could fight back and die slowly after enhanced interrogation and torture designed to ensure complete information extraction before termination. The device in Commander Cross's hand now showed 11 minutes remaining on whatever countdown was measuring time toward termination completion. The beeping had become background noise that marked seconds toward the final elimination of Project Helios and everyone who possessed knowledge that could compromise program security. But something fundamental had shifted in the briefing room dynamics. The revelation that Commander Cross was concealing identification related to Project Helios had created uncertainty about her actual role in termination procedures. Was she the elimination authority, or was she another enhanced soldier scheduled for termination, along with everyone else? Chief Morales voiced the question that everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, are you implementing termination protocols, or are you scheduled for elimination, along with other Helios personnel?" Commander Cross's response came after a long pause that suggested internal conflict about revealing information that might compromise her survival. Personnel roles and termination procedures remain classified until implementation parameters have been finalized. The evasive answer confirmed that her role was more complex than simple evaluation authority. If she was scheduled for elimination along with other Project Helios personnel, then her implementation of termination protocols would result in her own death after completing the mission that had brought her to Coronado. Admiral Thorne moved to the central display screen, activating final classified material that revealed the complete scope of Project Helios termination operations. Personnel lists, elimination schedules, and disposal protocols showed a coordinated operation designed to eliminate hundreds of enhanced soldiers and thousands of support personnel who possessed compromising knowledge. Global termination procedures include elimination of all personnel with direct knowledge of Helios operations, regardless of classification level or operational authority, Admiral Thorne announced, his voice carrying satisfaction that seemed inappropriate, given the scope of planned mass murder. The revelation that termination included elimination of operational authority meant that Commander Cross was scheduled for elimination after completing her mission at Coronado. Her implementation of termination protocols would conclude with her own death, ensuring that no surviving personnel possessed knowledge that could compromise program security. Dr. Ivers stepped forward with final documentation that revealed the technological components of global termination procedures. Automated elimination systems, fail-safe protocols, and evidence destruction mechanisms showed a coordinated operation designed to eliminate all traces of Project Helios within a precisely timed operational window. Automated systems will complete termination procedures according to predetermined schedules that cannot be modified or delayed once implementation has been initiated, Dr. Ivers explained, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone describing mechanical processes rather than mass murder. Automated systems meant that termination procedures would continue regardless of personnel decisions or resistance. Once initiated, elimination protocols would proceed according to programming that couldn't be stopped by human intervention, ensuring complete destruction of evidence and personnel associated with Project Helios operations. The briefing room fell silent as 30 elite warriors processed the implications of being trapped in an automated elimination system that would kill everyone present according to programming that had already been initiated. The countdown was measuring time toward their own deaths, implemented through systems that couldn't be stopped or modified. Commander Cross moved away from the door controls, her actions revealing new information about the concealed identification that had been outlined beneath her ACU blouse. As she turned to face the assembled personnel, the fabric pulled tight across her back, clearly showing the shape and size of what appeared to be an extensive tattoo or marking. The outline was too large and too complex to be standard military identification. It looked like the kind of elaborate tattoo that told a story, marked significant events, or identified membership in specialized organizations that didn't officially exist. The concealment suggested that revealing it would compromise operational security or personal survival. Ramsey found himself speaking again, his tactical awareness overriding consideration of security implications. "Ma'am, does concealed identification relate to Project Helios enhancement procedures, or does it represent different operational authority that might affect termination protocols?" The question was professionally phrased, but everyone in the briefing room understood its real meaning. If Commander Cross's concealed identification represented different operational authority, then she might have the capability to stop or modify termination procedures that were scheduled to eliminate everyone present. Commander Cross's response came after another long pause that suggested calculation of survival probabilities and operational requirements. Identification parameters remain classified, but operational authority may include capabilities that exceed current assessment protocols. The carefully phrased answer confirmed that she possessed operational authority beyond what had been revealed during the morning's briefing. If her capabilities exceeded assessment protocols, then she might be able to modify or stop termination procedures that had been presented as automated and irreversible. Admiral Thorne's reaction to Commander Cross's response was immediate and revealing. His hand moved unconsciously toward his service weapon, while his eyes fixed on her concealed identification with recognition that suggested familiarity with whatever was hidden beneath her ACU blouse. "Commander Cross, are you operating under authorization that exceeds Project Helios termination protocols?" Admiral Thorne asked, his voice carrying new tension that suggested personal concern about operational complications that threatened his mission's success. Authorization levels remain classified according to operational security requirements that supersede current briefing parameters. The bureaucratic non-answer was actually a confirmation that Commander Cross possessed authorization beyond Project Helios operations. If her authorization superseded briefing parameters, then she was operating according to orders that came from authorities higher than Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers. The device in her hand continued its countdown, now showing 7 minutes remaining toward whatever termination procedures had been scheduled. But the revelation that she possessed superseding authorization meant that the countdown might be measuring something different than simple elimination protocols. Lieutenant Crane processed the implications with tactical awareness that suggested alternative interpretations of the morning's events. "Ma'am, are current termination procedures designed to eliminate Project Helios personnel, or are they designed to eliminate the personnel responsible for Project Helios operations?" The question hit the briefing room like a revelation that transformed everyone's understanding of what was actually happening. If termination procedures were designed to eliminate responsible personnel rather than enhance soldiers, then Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers were the actual targets, while Commander Cross was the elimination authority rather than another victim. Commander Cross's response confirmed the tactical reversal that changed everything. Termination procedures include elimination of personnel responsible for unauthorized human experimentation and violation of constitutional protections against military testing of human subjects without informed consent. The confirmation that Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers were the actual targets of termination procedures created immediate tactical complications. They were trapped in a briefing room with someone who had been authorized to eliminate them for war crimes disguised as military research, while they'd believed they were implementing the elimination of enhanced soldiers. Admiral Thorne's hand completed its movement toward his service weapon, but his action was blocked by Commander Cross's immediate response. Her movement was faster than anyone present could follow, transforming her from stationary evaluation authority to mobile combat threat in less time than it took to register the change. The concealed weapon that appeared in her hand was not a standard military issue. It looked like specialized equipment designed for covert operations, where conventional firearms would be inappropriate or ineffective. The device resembled a pharmaceutical injector rather than a traditional weapon, suggesting elimination methods that left no ballistic evidence. "Admiral, your weapon will remain holstered unless you prefer immediate termination rather than standard processing procedures," Commander Cross announced, her voice carrying deadly authority that transformed the briefing room into a combat zone. The tactical reversal was complete. Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers had been lured into a briefing room where they could be eliminated for war crimes, while the assembled SEALs had been positioned as witnesses to ensure that justice was documented and verified by military personnel with unquestionable integrity. Dr. Ivers moved toward his communication station, but his action was intercepted by Chief Morales, whose tactical awareness had processed the situation faster than anyone else present. "Doctor, communication systems have been disabled. External contact is impossible until termination procedures have been completed." The confirmation that communication systems had been disabled meant that Project Helios termination was proceeding according to plans that included elimination of responsible personnel rather than enhanced soldiers. Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers were trapped without backup or escape routes, while their intended victims had become their judges. Commander Cross moved to the central display screen, her actions revealing final classified material that painted the complete picture of Project Helios operations and the criminal prosecution that had been secretly organized to bring responsible personnel to justice. Project Helios violated constitutional protections, international laws governing human experimentation, and military regulations designed to prevent unauthorized modification of military personnel, she announced, her voice carrying prosecutorial authority that explained her presence at Coronado. Constitutional violations meant that Project Helios operations had been conducted outside a legal framework designed to protect military personnel from unauthorized experimentation. International law violations suggested war crimes that could trigger prosecution by agencies beyond military authority. Military regulation violations meant that Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers had operated outside their legal authority while implementing human experimentation programs. The classified material revealed congressional investigations, FBI criminal probes, and international court proceedings that had been secretly coordinated to ensure simultaneous prosecution of Project Helios personnel worldwide. The global termination operation was actually a coordinated law enforcement action disguised as military elimination procedures. Admiral Thorne's face had gone pale as he processed the implications of being trapped in a legal operation rather than military termination. "Commander, you're exceeding your authority. Project Helios operations were conducted under classified authorization that exceeds your clearance level." Commander Cross's response was immediate and devastating. Authorization documents were fabricated using forged signatures and falsified congressional approval. Criminal investigation has confirmed that Project Helios operations were conducted without legal authority and constitute war crimes under international law. The confirmation that authorization documents were fabricated meant that Project Helios had been conducted as a criminal conspiracy rather than legitimate military research. Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers had operated outside legal authority while believing they possessed classified protection from prosecution. Dr. Ivers attempted one final communication with external authorities, but his access codes no longer functioned. Security systems throughout Coronado had been reconfigured to prevent communication by personnel under criminal investigation while allowing law enforcement coordination to proceed according to predetermined schedules. Communication systems will remain disabled until criminal processing has been completed and evidence has been secured for prosecution, Commander Cross explained, her voice carrying legal authority that exceeded military command structure. Legal authority meant that she was operating under federal law enforcement mandate rather than military orders. Criminal processing suggested that Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers would face civilian prosecution for war crimes committed while wearing military uniforms. The device in Commander Cross's hand continued its countdown, now showing 4 minutes remaining, toward completion of procedures that would secure evidence and testimony required for prosecution of Project Helios personnel. The beeping had become background noise that marked time toward justice rather than elimination. Lieutenant Crane stepped forward, his tactical awareness providing context for understanding the legal operation that had been disguised as military termination. "Ma'am, are assembled personnel being asked to provide testimony for criminal prosecution, or are we classified as potential witnesses requiring protection?" Commander Cross's response revealed the final component of the operation that had brought her to Coronado. Personnel present have been selected as witness testimony for criminal proceedings that will expose Project Helios operations and ensure that responsible individuals face prosecution for war crimes. Witness testimony meant that their morning's experience in the briefing room had been documented to provide evidence for criminal prosecution. Their reactions to Project Helios revelations, their professional assessment of enhanced soldier programs, and their response to termination threats would all become part of legal proceedings designed to ensure justice for victims of human experimentation. Admiral Thorne made his final attempt to regain control of the situation that had spiraled beyond his understanding or authority. "Commander Cross, you're making a career-ending mistake. Project Helios enjoys protection at levels you cannot comprehend." But as he spoke, his movement caused Commander Cross's ACU blouse to pull tight across her back during her response preparation. The fabric outlined the concealed tattoo, clearly enough for everyone present to see its size and complexity. The marking was extensive enough to cover most of her back, suggesting elaborate artwork that told a significant story. Chief Morales noticed the outline and realized that revealing Commander Cross's concealed identification might provide crucial information about her actual authority and mission. "Ma'am, Would disclosure of concealed identification help personnel understand the legal authority behind current criminal processing procedures? Commander Cross paused, her hand moving unconsciously toward her back as she calculated the security implications of revealing identification that she'd concealed throughout the morning's operation. The decision would determine whether assembled personnel understood her actual role in bringing Project Helios criminals to justice. Identification disclosure requires security assessment of personnel trustworthiness and operational security compliance, she replied, her voice carrying new tension that suggested internal conflict about revealing information that could compromise her survival or mission success. The hesitation suggested that her concealed identification was more significant than simple military markings or operational authority. Whatever was hidden beneath her ACU blouse would transform everyone's understanding of who she was and why she'd been authorized to conduct criminal processing of Project Helios personnel. Ramsey found himself speaking for the assembled personnel, his voice carrying collective curiosity that had been building throughout the morning's revelations. Ma'am, personnel present have demonstrated professional behavior and security compliance despite extreme stress conditions. Identification disclosure might help us understand our role in ensuring justice for Project Helios victims. It was a carefully phrased request that acknowledged her authority while appealing to justice for enhanced soldiers who had been victims of human experimentation. The assembled SEALs had proven their trustworthiness through their response to impossible circumstances, earning the right to understand the complete truth about the operation they'd witnessed. Commander Cross moved to the center of the briefing room, her position ensuring that everyone present would have clear visual access when she revealed the identification that would explain everything. Her hands moved to the collar of her ACU blouse, fingers working the buttons with deliberate precision. Personnel identification includes operational authority and personal history that explains legal mandate for Project Helios criminal prosecution, she announced, her voice carrying finality that suggested complete disclosure of information that had been classified throughout the morning's operation. As she unbuttoned her ACU blouse and pulled it forward, the tattoo that had been concealed became fully visible. The artwork was indeed extensive, covering most of her back with intricate detail that told a story of military service, personal loss, and professional dedication that exceeded anything the assembled personnel had imagined. The tattoo was a masterpiece of military memorial art. At the center, an American flag flying at half-staff provided the backdrop for a series of military symbols that represented different branches of service. Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps emblems surrounded the flag, but each had been modified to include memorial elements that suggested personal loss rather than simple service pride. Below the service emblems, a series of dates and names created a memorial wall that documented specific battles, operations, and casualties that had personal meaning to whoever wore the tattoo. The dates spanned multiple deployments across different theaters of operation, suggesting extensive combat experience in environments where American forces had suffered significant casualties. But it was the bottom section of the tattoo that explained everything. In an elaborate script that required hours of precise needlework, a single line provided the context that transformed their understanding of Commander Cross's mission and authority. In memory of the enhanced soldiers who died serving a lie. The memorial tattoo confirmed that Commander Cross was not simply law enforcement authority assigned to prosecute Project Helios criminals. She was personally connected to enhanced soldiers who had been victims of human experimentation, and her mission represented personal justice as well as legal prosecution. The briefing room fell silent as 30 elite warriors processed the implications of being in the presence of someone who had lost fellow soldiers to Project Helios operations and had been authorized to ensure that responsible personnel faced consequences for their war crimes. Admiral Thorne's face had gone completely pale as he recognized the personal nature of Commander Cross's mission. Commander, personal vendettas have no place in military justice proceedings. Commander Cross's response was immediate and devastating. Personal connection to victims ensures that justice proceedings include perspective from personnel who witnessed the human cost of unauthorized experimentation. Legal authority includes a mandate to represent victims who cannot speak for themselves. The confirmation that she represented victims of Project Helios operations meant that criminal prosecution would include testimony from someone who had personally witnessed the human cost of enhanced soldier programs. Her authority extended beyond simple law enforcement, to advocacy for soldiers who had been destroyed by programs designed to create more effective weapons. Dr. Ivers made one final attempt to assert authority that he no longer possessed. "Commander, you're exceeding legal boundaries. Project Helios personnel cannot be prosecuted for classified operations conducted under appropriate authorization." But his words were interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles outside the briefing facility. Multiple engines, coordinated arrival timing, and professional organization suggested law enforcement backup arriving according to predetermined schedules that had been coordinated with Commander Cross's operation. Federal agents and military police have arrived to secure evidence and transport personnel for criminal processing, Commander Cross announced, her voice carrying satisfaction that suggested mission completion after extensive preparation and personal dedication to ensuring justice. The device in her hand finally completed its countdown, the beeping stopping as automated systems throughout Coronado Naval Base implemented security protocols designed to preserve evidence and prevent escape by personnel under criminal investigation. The countdown had been measuring time toward the arrival of law enforcement backup rather than elimination procedures. The steel doors of the briefing room opened to reveal federal agents in tactical gear, their presence confirming that Project Helios termination was actually criminal prosecution, disguised as military operation. Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers would face civilian courts for war crimes committed while using military authority to conduct unauthorized human experimentation. What happens next proves that some truths are too dangerous to survive. If this story of hidden experiments and family betrayal has you questioning everything, there's another tale of military deception that will blow your mind even more. As federal agents moved into the briefing room with professional efficiency, Commander Cross began gathering classified documents that would serve as evidence in criminal proceedings designed to expose the complete scope of Project Helios operations. Her movements carried the satisfaction of someone completing a mission that had required extensive personal sacrifice and professional dedication. But as she reached across the briefing table to secure additional evidence, her movement caused her ACU blouse to shift again, revealing additional details of the memorial tattoo that painted an even more personal picture of her connection to Project Helios victims. Chief Morales noticed additional elements of the tattoo that hadn't been visible during initial disclosure. "Ma'am, are there specific personnel memorialized in your tattoo who were directly affected by Project Helios operations?" Commander Cross's pause before responding suggested that revealing additional personal information would complete the story of her mission and explain the dedication that had brought her to Coronado to ensure justice for enhanced soldiers who had been victims of human experimentation. The memorial includes 23 enhanced soldiers who died during Project Helios operations, including my brother Ethan Cross, who volunteered for specialized training and was destroyed by enhancement procedures that eliminated his ability to function as a human being. The revelation that her brother had been a Project Helios victim explained everything about her mission, her authority, and her dedication to ensuring that responsible personnel faced prosecution for war crimes disguised as military research. Personal loss had motivated legal action that would prevent future victims of unauthorized human experimentation. Admiral Thorne's final words before being escorted away by federal agents carried desperate authority that no longer held any power. "Commander Cross, you've destroyed programs that were essential for national security. Enhanced soldier capabilities were necessary for protecting American interests in hostile environments." Commander Cross's response provided the final judgment on Project Helios operations and the personnel who had implemented them. "National security cannot be protected through programs that destroy the soldiers we claim to be defending. Enhanced capabilities created through human experimentation represent the same war crimes we prosecute our enemies for committing." The moral authority of her statement settled over the briefing room like final judgment. Project Helios had violated the constitutional principles and human rights protections that American military personnel swore to defend, creating enhanced soldiers through methods that destroyed their humanity in the name of operational effectiveness. As Admiral Thorne and Dr. Ivers were escorted away by federal agents, the assembled SEALs found themselves witnesses to the complete exposure of military programs that had operated outside legal authority while using classified protection to avoid accountability for war crimes committed against American soldiers. The investigation that followed would reveal the complete scope of Project Helios operations. 17 facilities worldwide, hundreds of enhanced soldiers destroyed by experimental procedures, and a network of military and civilian personnel who had participated in human experimentation disguised as specialized training programs. Congressional hearings would expose the fabricated authorization documents, falsified medical reports, and systematic deception that had allowed Project Helios to operate for 8 years without oversight from agencies responsible for protecting military personnel from unauthorized experimentation. International courts would prosecute responsible personnel for war crimes that violated treaties designed to prevent human experimentation by military organizations. The proceedings would establish legal precedent, ensuring that enhanced soldier programs could never again operate without informed consent and comprehensive oversight. But the personal cost of exposing Project Helios extended beyond criminal prosecution of responsible personnel. Enhanced soldiers who survived the program's termination faced lifetime medical and psychological support requirements that exceeded military healthcare capabilities. Commander Cross's brother Ethan had been typical of Project Helios victims. Enhanced capabilities came at the cost of emotional regulation, social integration, and psychological stability that made civilian life impossible. Enhanced soldiers required institutional care that the military had never planned to provide because the program had been designed for operations rather than long-term personnel welfare. The memorial tattoo on Commander Cross's back would eventually include additional names as enhanced soldiers succumbed to medical complications, psychological breakdown, and suicide rates that exceeded combat casualty statistics. Enhancement procedures had created temporary military effectiveness at the cost of permanent human destruction. Military reform legislation passed in response to Project Helios exposure included constitutional protections against human experimentation, mandatory congressional oversight of enhancement research, and victim compensation programs that acknowledged the government's responsibility for personnel who had been destroyed by unauthorized modification procedures. The Coronado Naval Base briefing room, where Project Helios had been exposed, became a memorial site where military personnel could learn about the constitutional principles that protected them from unauthorized experimentation by their own command structure. Educational programs ensured that future military leaders understood the legal and moral boundaries that separated legitimate training from war crimes. Commander Cross continued her law enforcement career with specialized focus on military justice and constitutional protection for military personnel. Her experience with Project Helios prosecution provided expertise that prevented similar programs from operating outside legal oversight in the future. The 23 enhanced soldiers memorialized in her tattoo represented victims who had trusted military authority and paid for that trust with their humanity. Their sacrifice had enabled legal reforms that would protect future soldiers from enhancement programs that created military effectiveness through human destruction. But even after Project Helios prosecution was completed, questions remained about the enhanced soldiers who had survived modification procedures. Their enhanced capabilities made them valuable assets for legitimate military operations, but their psychological damage made them security risks that required careful management. Some enhanced soldiers adapted to modified military roles that utilized their capabilities while providing support for their psychological limitations. Specialized units were created where enhanced personnel could serve effectively while receiving medical and psychological care that civilian environments couldn't provide. Other enhanced soldiers required institutional care in facilities designed specifically for personnel whose modifications made normal social functioning impossible. These facilities represented lifetime commitments that acknowledged the government's responsibility for personnel who had been permanently damaged by unauthorized experimentation. The most successful enhanced soldiers found purpose in training and education roles where their experience with modification procedures could help prevent future victims of human experimentation. Their testimony in congressional hearings and international courts provided authoritative evidence that established legal precedent in protecting military personnel from unauthorized enhancement programs. Commander Cross's investigation had revealed that Project Helios was not unique. Similar programs had operated throughout military history, creating enhanced soldiers through methods that violated constitutional protections and human rights principles. Legal reforms established comprehensive oversight that would prevent future programs from operating without informed consent and accountability. The constitutional principles that military personnel swore to defend included protection from their own government when military authority exceeded legal boundaries. Project Helios prosecution demonstrated that no military program could operate outside the constitutional framework, regardless of classified protection or national security justification. The memorial tattoo that had exposed Project Helios operations continued to remind everyone who saw it that military service required protection of personnel as well as mission accomplishment. Enhanced capabilities could never justify human experimentation that destroyed the soldiers who volunteered to serve their country. Years after Project Helios exposure, the constitutional protections and oversight mechanisms that had been established in response to the program's war crimes continued to protect military personnel from unauthorized experimentation while allowing legitimate research to proceed with informed consent and comprehensive accountability. The briefing room at Coronado Naval Base, where Project Helios had been exposed, remained a symbol of constitutional principles that protected American military personnel from their own government when military authority exceeded legal boundaries. The morning when Commander Cross had revealed her memorial tattoo had changed military justice forever. The enhanced soldiers who had died during Project Helios operations were finally honored with memorials that acknowledged their sacrifice and the government's responsibility for personnel who had been destroyed by programs that violated constitutional protections designed to prevent human experimentation by military authority. Commander Cross's brother Ethan was among the enhanced soldiers memorialized at Arlington National Cemetery in a special section dedicated to personnel who had died serving programs that exceeded legal authority. Their memorial acknowledged that military service sometimes required protection from the very organizations that soldiers swore to serve. The legal precedent established by Project Helios prosecution ensured that enhanced soldier programs would be subject to constitutional oversight that prevented human experimentation disguised as military training. Future soldiers would be protected by a legal framework that acknowledged their humanity as well as their military utility. But perhaps the most important legacy of Project Helios exposure was the understanding that constitutional principles applied to military personnel as well as civilians. Soldiers who volunteered to serve their country retained human rights that no military program could violate, regardless of operational requirements or national security justification. The memorial tattoo that had revealed Project Helios operations had become a symbol of military personnel who refused to allow constitutional violations to continue under classified protection. Justice for enhanced soldier victims had required courage from military personnel who risked their careers to expose war crimes committed by their own command structure. In the end, Project Helios prosecution had demonstrated that American military strength came from constitutional principles rather than enhanced soldier capabilities. Protecting the humanity of military personnel was essential for maintaining the moral authority that distinguished American forces from enemies who used human experimentation to create military advantages. The morning at Coronado Naval Base when Commander Cross had exposed her memorial tattoo had changed everything about military justice, constitutional protection, and the relationship between military authority and human rights. The enhanced soldiers memorialized in her tattoo had not died in vain because their sacrifice had prevented future victims of unauthorized human experimentation. And in briefing rooms throughout the military, personnel continued to learn about constitutional protections that prevented their own government from treating them as experimental subjects rather than human beings worthy of legal protection and moral consideration. Project Helios would never be repeated because the price of exposure had been too high for anyone to risk similar war crimes in the future. But the true scope of Commander Cross's investigation extended far beyond the Project Helios prosecution that had made headlines in military justice publications. 3 years after Admiral Thorne's conviction for war crimes, classified documents revealed that her memorial tattoo contained additional information that had never been fully disclosed during the criminal proceedings. The 23 names memorialized on her back represented enhanced soldiers from 7 different experimental programs that had operated simultaneously across multiple decades. Project Helios had been merely the most recent iteration of human experimentation that stretched back to the Cold War era, when military research had first begun exploring enhancement possibilities that exceeded natural human limitations. Each name on Commander Cross's memorial tattoo told a story of military personnel who had volunteered for specialized training and been destroyed by enhancement procedures that promised operational effectiveness while delivering psychological devastation. The complete network of experimental programs had affected thousands of military personnel, whose modifications had been hidden under classifications that prevented accountability for decades. Dr. Marcus Hoffman, the military psychiatrist who had treated enhanced soldier survivors, published research that revealed the systematic nature of military human experimentation that had operated outside constitutional oversight since the 1940s. His work documented psychological profiles of enhancement victims that showed consistent patterns of emotional regulation destruction, social integration failure, and identity fragmentation that made civilian life impossible. The psychiatric research confirmed what Commander Cross had witnessed personally through her brother's deterioration following Project Helios enhancement procedures. Modified soldiers retained their enhanced capabilities but lost the psychological foundation that made those capabilities meaningful in human terms. Enhanced strength, accelerated learning, and stress resistance came at the cost of emotional connection, moral reasoning, and personal identity that defined human consciousness. Military medical facilities throughout the country were retrofitted to provide specialized care for enhanced soldier survivors who required lifetime support that exceeded standard veteran healthcare capabilities. The Department of Veterans Affairs created separate treatment protocols for personnel whose modifications required medical intervention that conventional healthcare providers couldn't understand or address effectively. Commander Sarah Chen, who had served as medical liaison during Project Helios operations, testified before Congress about the systematic deception that had been used to obtain informed consent from enhancement volunteers. Military recruitment protocols had described specialized training programs while concealing pharmaceutical intervention, psychological conditioning, and neurological modification that constituted human experimentation under any reasonable definition. The informed consent protocols revealed during congressional hearings showed that enhancement volunteers had been told they were participating in advanced training programs designed to improve combat effectiveness through conventional methods. No volunteer had been informed about pharmaceutical enhancement, psychological conditioning, or neurological modification that would permanently alter their cognitive and emotional functioning. Legal precedent established through Project Helios prosecution was applied retroactively to previous experimental programs, resulting in federal compensation for families of personnel who had been destroyed by enhancement procedures implemented without informed consent. The compensation program acknowledged government responsibility for personnel who had been permanently damaged by unauthorized human experimentation conducted under military authority. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of Project Helios exposure was the creation of constitutional oversight mechanisms that prevented classification from being used to conceal war crimes or human rights violations. The Military Human Rights Protection Act required congressional approval for any research program that included modification of military personnel beyond conventional training parameters. Constitutional protections established in response to Project Helios included mandatory medical advocacy for military personnel participating in any experimental program, regardless of classification level or operational requirements. Independent medical professionals were required to verify informed consent and monitor participant welfare throughout any modification procedure or enhancement training. The advocacy protocols ensured that military personnel retained civilian legal representation during participation in experimental programs, preventing military authority from isolating participants from constitutional protections or civilian oversight. Enhanced soldiers could no longer be created in legal isolation that prevented accountability for experimental procedures that exceeded medical ethics standards. International cooperation frameworks were established to share information about military human experimentation and prevent enhancement programs from operating across national boundaries without oversight from human rights organizations. NATO allies implemented joint protocols that required disclosure of enhancement research to prevent secret programs from utilizing international cooperation to avoid domestic legal restrictions. The global cooperation ensured that enhanced soldier programs could not operate by moving experimental procedures between countries with different legal frameworks or oversight mechanisms. Human experimentation required consistent oversight, regardless of where enhancement research was conducted or which military organizations were implementing modification procedures. Commander Cross's continued work in military justice focused on identifying personnel who had been affected by historical enhancement programs that predated Project Helios. Her investigation techniques, developed through exposing Admiral Thorne's war crimes, proved effective for uncovering experimental programs that had operated under different classifications and authorization structures throughout military history. The historical investigation revealed that enhancement experimentation had been conducted continuously since World War II, with each generation of military leadership believing they were pioneering new capabilities while actually repeating human experimentation that had been implemented secretly for decades. Institutional memory had been deliberately fragmented to prevent oversight and accountability for enhancement programs that violated constitutional protections. Classification had been used systematically to conceal human experimentation from congressional oversight, judicial review, and public accountability that would have prevented enhancement programs from operating outside constitutional framework. Secret research had been conducted under national security justification that exceeded legal authority while claiming protection from oversight mechanisms designed to prevent war crimes. The fragmentation of institutional memory had been deliberate policy designed to prevent accountability for enhancement programs that operated outside legal authority. Each generation of military leadership was told they were implementing new capabilities while actually continuing human experimentation that had been hidden from oversight for decades through classification and compartmentalization. Commander Cross's memorial tattoo served as institutional memory that prevented deliberate historical amnesia about enhancement programs and their victims. The names and dates memorialized on her back provided a permanent record of personnel who had been destroyed by human experimentation that military leadership preferred to forget or classify beyond public accountability. Educational programs implemented at military academies included comprehensive instruction about constitutional protections that applied to military personnel and historical examples of enhancement programs that had violated those protections. Future military leaders were required to understand legal boundaries that prevented human experimentation regardless of operational requirements or national security justification. The educational protocols ensured that military leadership understood their constitutional obligations to personnel under their command and legal consequences of implementing enhancement programs that exceeded informed consent or medical ethics standards. Constitutional education became a mandatory requirement for military leadership positions that included authority over experimental research or personnel modification programs. But the most important legacy of Project Helios exposure was the understanding that military effectiveness could not be achieved through methods that violated constitutional principles designed to protect military personnel from their own government. Enhanced soldier capabilities were meaningless if they were created through human experimentation that destroyed the humanity of personnel who volunteered to serve their country. The constitutional framework that protected military personnel from human experimentation represented core American values that distinguished democratic military institutions from authoritarian organizations that treated soldiers as expendable resources rather than human beings worthy of legal protection and moral consideration. Military strength ultimately came from constitutional principles that protected personnel while enabling legitimate training and development that enhanced capabilities through methods that preserved human dignity and individual rights. Enhancement could be achieved through conventional training, education, and development that respected constitutional protections while improving military effectiveness through ethical methods. Commander Cross's investigation had proven that human experimentation was unnecessary for creating effective military personnel, and that enhancement programs actually weakened military organizations by violating constitutional principles that provided moral authority for American military operations worldwide. The memorial tattoo that had exposed Project Helios continued to remind military personnel that their service was protected by constitutional principles that prevented their own government from treating them as experimental subjects. Military authority was limited by a legal framework that acknowledged the humanity of personnel who volunteered to serve their country. Years after Project Helios prosecution, the constitutional protections established in response to enhancement program exposure continued to evolve through legal precedent and congressional oversight that prevented similar war crimes from operating under classified protection in the future.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best. See each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Teased History.